Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to commsHERO. This is my first session of commsHERO week, although I did dip into one earlier just to get myself back in the commsHERO, kind of get myself the commsHERO feels. So very excited to be back here, and I hope you've been having a great time so far. I'm sure you all know already that we've got the emojis to show some love and appreciation, and the comments on the right hand side of your screen, so you can share your thoughts and insights throughout the session. And at the end of this session we will be doing Q&A, so you can use the Q&A tab, which is at the top right of your screen, and we'll be responding to those questions at the end. And as it's commsHERO, obviously there are going to be lots of prizes, and I imagine swag and all sorts of wonderful things up for grabs. I am wearing my donut t-shirt today, so I'm representing. So you need to share your screen grabs and your post on socials using the hashtag commsHERO, and there'll be a prize given out, I think, at the end of the week. So without further ado, I am very excited to welcome Sara Thornhurst here today. She's got an incredible session speaking about the power of language in disability inclusion, which is just a really vital topic, and I think something that a lot of us will really benefit from listening to. So Sara is a chartered PR practitioner and a disability activist and educator. She was cited as one of the Shaw Trust top 100 influential people with a disability in 2018. She speaks on disability inclusion, accessibility, and diversity issues at multiple events, and she also is the chair of the CIPR Yorkshire and Lincolnshire Regional Committee. So I'm sure she has lots of friends and colleagues on this session today. So please do give it up for Sara, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Carly. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this commsHERO session on the language of disability. I'm going to put a quick content warning here. In this session, I am going to say some words that are offensive and considered slurs to disabled people as examples of some of the language that we use and some of the issues that we have. So just so you're aware, when those words come up, they are there for a reason, in case you're a bit taken aback by them. All right, let's crack on. So language and disabled identity. Language, as we know, is a tool of oppression, and particularly the written word. So as communicators and wordsmiths, we need to know how the words and language that we use regarding disability affects the attitudes, actions, and behaviours of society. So until very recently, almost all of the language that we use around disability has been developed by non-disabled people and is based on the medical model of disability. So the medical model centres someone's disability as a disabling factor in their life. And it wasn't until the development of the social model in the 1980s when language slowly began to change. And I mean slowly because it's still happening. The social model was created as a system, and it was created by and for disabled people, and it centres on people being disabled by society's barriers. Okay. So in more recent years, one of the biggest shifts has been away from person-first language towards identity-first language, and that's happened really within the disabled community. For example, instead of saying like a person with a disability, we'd say a disabled person. And that change is being driven by a reclamation of self by disabled people and a reclamation of identity, and the wider acceptance and understanding of the social model of disability in society. And the reason that matters is because person-first language kind of reinforces the outdated and harmful narrative that having a disability is inherently a bad thing. So it's something kind of shameful, something that isn't really a part of us, we don't want to be a part of us, something that we can hold at arm's length, something negative, essentially. Whereas identity-first language celebrates the disability as part of the whole person. And for many, that is a much more accurate reality. A disability cannot be separated from personhood because most of the time it affects absolutely every aspect of life, and as such is part of our core identity. And this move towards identity first language is also closely tied to the social model of disability, as I mentioned. And that is a big progression from the medical model, which is generally considered really harmful and very limiting to disabled people. It is worth noting here that the social model isn't perfect and people do have some issues with it, but it is a big step forward from the medical model that we have been using for a longer period of time. So a couple of points just on this last slide. Rules to remember an identity first, be person first. If in doubt, ask. So if you are not sure, ask the person, says, like, do you prefer to be called a disabled person or an autistic person or someone with autism? Like, what is your preference, kind of thing? That's okay. Take your cues from the disabled person you're speaking to. If they are using a particular type of language to describe themselves, that's generally how they want to do it. So follow their lead, essentially. And this final point, if you are not part of that community, your opinion takes a back seat. So I've had multiple discussions with non-disabled people who think that certain words and certain phrases are fine because I think that that's an acceptable way to talk about it. What you think doesn't matter if you're not a part of that community, in a nutshell. Okay. So some words to avoid in communications. Now, this is a big list of words here. We have courageous, able-bodied, confined, handicapped, challenged, normal, high-functioning, low-functioning, special needs, hidden, invisible disabilities, crippled, suffers from, wheelchair-bound, invalid, differently abled, handy-capable, struck down, victim of, brave, overcome, the disabled, and the last one, retarded, which is a terrible word, but it is still used now. There's a couple of specific ones on that list I want to pay attention to. And the first is high and low functioning. This is commonly used to describe people with autism spectrum disorder, but it's very outdated and incorrect term, but it still is kind of used a lot, to kind of talk about autism and people with autism. Again, we've got to consider the power dynamics of language and oppression here, and this is used as a label by non-autistic people, and given to autistic people to categorise them by value, essentially. For example, high functioning, like a savant; low functioning, non-verbal, unable to work. But in reality, ASD is much more complex than that kind of savant persona that we see represented in media and films and things like that. So try to avoid those terms if you can in relation to autism. And another tip, which is more design based, please don't use the puzzle piece in any comms related to autism or neurodiversity because it is got very ableist origins. And if anybody's interested in that, I can supply some links as to why that's not a good term to use. And the second term on here is hidden or invisible disabilities. Now, this is one that's probably the most common at the moment. And it's one of the most recent changes in terms of language developments, I think, as well. And again, the reason for this change is that the terminology is used by non-disabled people to describe disabled people and people with impairments that they can't see and therefore can't easily identify or place into a labelled category box. But the disabilities are not invisible, they exist. And the word hidden has really negative connotations dating back to when anyone with a disability was essentially hidden from general society. And lastly, that very bottom word, the R word, this is sadly still used as an insult to describe both non-disabled and disabled people. It's used in the UK sometimes, although thankfully not as often as it was when I was growing up. And it's still used quite a lot in the US as well, although situations are changing over there too. And the thing is, we have 21 words on this list, simply to avoid saying almost 2 words, disabled and disability. Disabled is not a bad word. It's ableism that has created this negative association and something we should avoid in the language that we use. And we have to remember that for non-disabled people, language is a descriptor, and for disabled people, language is about identity and sense of self. Okay, and that's why it matters what we say and how we say it. This list of alternative options is much shorter because it is okay to use disabled, disabled person, disabled people, a group of disabled people, just not the disabled. Again, this is a list of alternatives, but if a disabled person says, hey, I really dislike the term impairment, you can you say disabled or another term? The answer is yes, of course we can, that's fine. Because any labelling, if labelling needs to happen, should be done by the person or persons at the centre of discussion. As an example, I highly dislike the term impairment. I don't like it used to describe me. I have impairments. I have hearing loss. I have an energy impairment. That's technically true. But personally, I very much dislike that word and will use either chronic illness or disabled or disability for me. Okay. So everyday communication really matters, and how we talk about disabled people and to disabled people in our everyday conversations is really important. These are some example sentences that you may have come across or you've said yourself. So the first one is, what is your disability versus what are your access needs? So think about this from perhaps a perspective of events and interviews, and even social occasions. Asking about access needs avoids putting a disabled person in a position of having to explain their situation to you. So it could be really personal, it could be really traumatic. It's also just none of your business, really, to be honest. So asking about access needs removes that need for explanation and helps the disabled person get what they need to be included in whatever's going on. The second set of statements is an example of othering. So they have additional needs versus they have access needs. The phrase additional needs kind of reinforces that it's out with the idea of normality, essentially. So the notion that disability is not normal, it's not a part of our everyday lives, when in fact it is. So saying someone has access needs normalizes that, and everyone in the world interacts with it in a different way. And that helps you make that statement clear. The final one, the type of statement you'd often kind of get when you're talking to others, not necessarily when there's a disabled person around, but that type of thing, for maybe having discussion about something. You'd say Sam suffers from ME versus Sam has ME. So the phrase suffers from, which was on, the slide from a couple of slides ago, it kind of invokes the idea of pity or victimhood, or this poor person suffers from things. I'm glad I don't suffer from that. It leads towards those kind of conversations. But saying that someone just has XYZ is just stating a fact. They have a condition, they have have a disability, they have an impairment, whatever it is. Personally, I also use live with as I live with a chronic illness, but I know that's not universal. And I use it interchangeably with have as well. So I have a chronic illness, I have hearing loss, or I live with chronic illness, or I live with hearing loss. They're kind of interchangeable for me. So this last section on this slide, questions and statements to avoid. People have said every one of these to me. And I have absolutely no doubt that each time it came from a really good place. But I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that these questions sting every single time. Because either I have to lie, I have to explain my medical story and my background, I have to justify why I look the way I do, or I have to smile politely through gritted teeth as someone recommends a cure to me. And some of the statements here, what happened to you, what's wrong with you, again, we're reinforcing that sense of othering, as in disability is not normal. What is wrong with you? It's inherently negative, those statements. You don't look ill, deaf, disabled, etc. That one I get quite a lot, because I appreciate today I have makeup on, I don't look ill. What you cannot see is I have a heated blanket wrapped around the bottom of my legs because I have a lot of pain today, and you can't see that, but I'm also wearing joggers and comfy clothes to try and ease the pain that I'm in, but you probably can't tell that just by looking at me right now. And all of these statements are there to make you feel less uncomfortable. They're there I'll try that again. My cognitive function stays a little bit low. the way I respond to those statements is about making you comfortable and making myself uncomfortable. So I don't want to cause offense to you by saying, hey, look, that's really irritating. Can you not say that? Even though that's what I want to say and what I should be able to say. But people take great offense if you kind of say, look, can you not give me cures because I've had this for a long time? Do you not think I've looked at all the options? And because it's coming from a nice place, because it's coming from a place of kindness and trying to help, I think that's why people get a lot more offended when you kind of push back a little bit on it. But again, consider the power balance here, because the way in which we speak to disabled people is always really from a position of dominance. So from the position of quote unquote normality, which is a terrible term anyway, to the quote unquote non-normal person. There's a power balance in there in these questions, all right? So try and avoid them if at all possible. Okay. Disability language and PR campaigns. Now, unfortunately, a lot of journalists and media outlets are still behind the times when it comes to disability language. I still often see phrases like suffers from and wheelchair bound in stories. Reach is really bad for that, like across a lot of their regional publications. I've pulled them up several times on it. And the thing is, I kind of understand it, because language is meant to be evocative. Yeah, it's meant to be transporting us to different places. It's meant to paint pictures in our mind. It's meant to give us a feeling of storytelling and wonder, right? But it's done for non-disabled people at the expense of disabled people in these scenarios. So when you are pitching stories or working on campaigns that are either disability centric or inclusive of disability, which in fairness, they all kind of should be, just consider the following points. So is it inspiration porn, for example? There's a link at the end of this that I will talk about, that I if you do nothing else today, just go and watch that link. It's a TED Talk, it's 18 minutes. It's come from the person who coined the term inspiration porn. Basically, that means, is it lauding a disabled person simply for existing in the body that they exist in? That's kind of inspiration porn. And tone is important as language. So what is the tone like here? Is it pitying? Is it condescending? Or is it infantilizing? Because infantilizing is one that's really common, and it's speaking to disabled people like they are children and like they have reduced ability and capability to understand. And I think sometimes people don't even realize that they're doing it, or they just don't speak to them at all and speak to the person they're with, if they're with someone. If you are responding to a journalist's inquiry, what angle are they taking on that story? Is it sensationalism? Is it inspiration porn? You have a duty of care to protect a disabled person or a group of disabled people from being exploited in that way. And has the campaign been informed and guided by disabled people? So if you have disabled people in your team, are they heavily involved in the work that you are doing? Or are you hiring outside help from disability consultants to make sure that the language that you are using and the way that you are phrasing things is informed by the social model, for example? Okay, 3 things that you can do right now. Check whether your job descriptions and employee comms align with the social model of disability. So all that kind of like employee handbooks, everything that you've got that kind of relates to your employees working with you. Are they within the social model of disability? Do they talk about disability and language in that way? Avoid using inspo porn content in campaigns and social media, including personal posts. And I am looking at you, LinkedIn, because I see so much of this all the time on LinkedIn, that the only disability in life is a bad attitude, all that kind of stuff. As you'll see in the TED Talk, a very good point that the speaker makes is no amount of positive thinking turned a set of stairs into a ramp. So try and avoid using that in your own posts and your content as well. And allyship. So if you see one of your journalist contacts or fellow PR pros using ableist language, please call them in, share the social model with them, explain to them that there's a couple of other words that they can use, or if they're a bit worried about using the words disabled or disability, not to. It's fine, crack on, go for it. And here are a few resources. So we've got Stella Young's TED Talk. So Stella Young is the person I was speaking about there. I Am Not Your Inspiration is her TED Talk. Now, Stella has sadly passed away. She was a comedian and journalist, and she is the one that coined the term inspiration porn. And it is a brilliant TED Talk. It really is. I highly recommend you watch it. There's AllyBot, which is a Slack bot. So if you're using Slack for inclusive language. And the final one is Gender Decoder. So it finds bias in job texts and things like that as well. So that's quite good for just making sure you're not skewing your job descriptions one way or another. And finally, there are so many people on social media channels making really good disability related content. I highly recommend you save some of these hashtags and follow them. Disability Twitter, Disability TikTok, Actually Autistic, and Accessibility. And one thing I will say is that please be aware that I am sharing these for educational purposes. So if you choose to engage with any of these hashtags, please do so with respect and kindness for the creators themselves. And that is the end of the presentation. I kind of rushed through that because I thought we'd finished a little bit, we were started a little bit late and I didn't want to run on. So that is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for watching that with me. And if you are interested in learning any more about disability awareness and journey, disability inclusion, you can visit NPR for any additional training courses that I offer.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. That was incredibly insightful, and I think a lot of people in the chat are really resonating with a lot of the things that you've talked about. A lot of people have sort of experienced those the improper use of those phrases, and I'm just going to pull out a couple of the comments. And also, if anyone has any questions, we pop them in the chat because it would be great to get some questions for Sarah. So Rebecca Roberts ran a focus group with young people with a range of impairments, and she says that the discourse on how they wanted to identify the language that worked for them varied, e.g. those born with a disability and those who acquired one. She said that one consensus was that they hated being patronized with language like inspirational. And that was one thing that I wanted to ask, actually, is I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable because they feel confronted when they don't know what to say, and so they'll use words like, "Oh, you're so courageous, you're so brave, you're an inspiration," and like you said, a lot of those things come from a good place. So how would you recommend kind of navigating that? Should we just never give any praise in case it's kind of misinterpreted, or because obviously we want to be kind to people as well. So what does kindness look like in that scenario?
I think I would take it further back than that, actually, because I think the bigger question is that why do we feel compelled to say things like that in the first place? So one, why are we feeling awkward? And why do we feel compelled to say, well done you, for just existing? And I think that's very much to do with internalized ableism and the ableism that we've learned for society. So I would look further back and actually go and research ableism, go and look at the history of disability in the UK, like go and find out like how ableism appears in society, because I think once you understand that a little bit more, you can start to work on your own internalized kind of biases that you have. And then you'll find that actually there isn't a problem, because disabled people are people. Why would you not speak to them exactly the same way you'd speak to... Do you know what I mean? It's such an odd thing that we have that awkwardness, and we have to figure out why we have that awkwardness. And that's kind of like the work that you have to do on yourself first. So it's not really about kindness. It's about sort of destigmatizing yourself, I would say.
Yeah, that's really true. And taking personal responsibility. Yeah, no, that's good. We're just going to have time for one more question. So Alison Lawton is asking, she says, I'm embarking on trying to get our exec leaders on board with changing ASD to ASC? I'm just going to show this question on stage so you can see it. It's not easy as the medical professional use ASD and we serve them. Any tips on how I can persuade them to adapt to ASC?
That's really interesting because I am not super familiar with ASC. Like my the work and the things that I've looked at are still using ASD, so I'm not 100% sure where that has come from. I would say probably you want to like work directly with the autistic community themselves on that one. Actually, if that comes maybe down to market research as well. So doing some like interviews and sort of my brain has stopped working. The word I'm looking for is questionnaire, but not a questionnaire. This is what cognitive function looks like in real life, and my brain just goes, we don't know what that word is, so we'll just figure out something else. But yeah, I'd say you want to kind of work with the community on that and actually help them, work with them to kind of support how they want to work, support how they want to be identified, and then take that back to your executive team and say, look, this is direct from the community. Like, this is what they're telling us. This is what we have to do. So like, I cannot get the word. Sorry, my brain is gone. I think I want to say workshops, but it's not workshops, but it's focus group.
Oh, there we go.
What I was looking for. You'd get there eventually. Focus group. Sorry, it was a really roundabout answer.
No, that's great. Thank you, Sarah. So just to wrap up, how can people get in touch with you?
I'm on the usual places. I am on Twitter, Sara Thornhurst. I'm on LinkedIn, Sara Thornhurst. I am on TikTok as well for my sins, which I kind of love, but that's not really professional. But two main places you can find me are pretty much Twitter and LinkedIn, and the website is npr.uk as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. And if anyone, I'm sure we all have lots of takeaways from that. So obviously, if you're sharing anything on social media, just make sure you tag Sarah in that as well, so she can see all your feedback and how her work is making an impact. So thank you so much, Sarah. Let's show some emoji love for Sarah. So next up, we have Carrie Ann Wade and guests for a panel about how communications has changed during COVID and how teams have adopted different ways of working and whether they're still using those. That is with the PRCA. So that's next up at 2:15, and just a reminder to share your commsHERO pictures to be in the running for the prize. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.